Welcome to episode 135 of the Civil War. That's for our viewers on YouTube. Get to see that outtake always with Funko Mary. All right, here we go. Welcome to episode 135 of the Civil War Breakfast Club podcast. This week, I am joined, as always, by the most awesome Civil War nerd I know, Darren, and I am just Mary. And that's my intro.
Wow, this is a
Yay.
great intro. It's been a couple of weeks since we last recorded, but I didn't realize that you were still bringing the intros, Mary. You're still
Yep.
bringing the fire. How are we doing today? What's going on?
Well, it's going well. We're obviously in a different location recording. So hopefully this
Mhm.
first recording in a new location goes okay. And we are also 4 years into this podcast. So thank you for doing this with me all these years. 135 episodes, 4 years. We just had our 4 year anniversary a couple weeks ago. So that's pretty cool. How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing great. It's good. It feels like fall is in the air a little bit. It feels like things are cooling off. We got some football this week, Mary. We got college and pro. So it feels like the heat is cooling down, and the pumpkin beer and the fire pits are going to be ready to go. So anyway, so what's going on? So I guess I'm just gonna
Well, so
whatever.
I was going to say, speaking of beer,
Oh,
pumpkin beer, what are you
oh,
drinking
I
this
didn't. I
afternoon?
honestly thought you were going to forget. Thank you so much, Mary. Speaking of pumpkin, it's called Baked Pumpkin Ale, and it's from Lancaster Brewing Company, right up the street in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. And it's pretty good. It's never too early for pumpkin. Don't care. Don't care. What about yourself? What are you drinking?
Never. Well, I am drinking Hoppy Trails IPA, which is just down the street here in Gettysburg at Appalachian Brewing Company. And I'm drinking out of my Oliver Otis Howard mug because he is going to figure into this episode that we are recording this afternoon. And so are in my background, many of the people are going to be mentioned in the
Yeah.
episode as well.
Yeah, and since you didn't ask, I'm drinking it out of my North Civil War Champions coffee mug because this episode we're going to talk about really it might be the nail in the coffin of the Confederacy, Mary. We're going to talk about this,
Mhm.
but I think it's important to talk about. But that's why I have my mug again. Thanks for asking.
You didn't mention it.
I,
Anyway, so we are a few weeks ago or a few episodes ago, we recorded an episode about the Battle of Peachtree Creek, which was kind of the beginning of the end of the fall of Atlanta. Now, that's what Sherman's been doing on his Atlanta campaign since early May of 1864. So 160 years ago, the Atlanta campaign is happening. And as I just said, we recorded an episode about the Battle of Peachtree Creek, which is really the beginning of the end for Atlanta. Today, we're going to be talking about what is one of the final battles before Atlanta falls to the Confederates, and that is the Battle of Jonesboro, which happened on August 31st and September 1st, 1864. So just literally had the 160th anniversary of it a couple days ago. So it's cool that we're recording very close to the anniversary of it. And it is the battle that happens right before Hood vacates the dance floor. He leaves Atlanta. Um, and it's really just it's going to open that way for Sherman to eventually do his march to the sea.
that is true. And also, since you didn't mention it, for the second consecutive episode, we're going to talk about the choo choos, Mary. Right?
Yep.
Remember, last time we talked about Ream Station. The last episode was about Hancock's plan to tear apart those tracks of the Weldon Railroad outside of Petersburg. This time, we're going to talk about the tracks outside of Atlanta, Georgia. Now, just like back in Virginia, the plan was to cut off the railroad
Mhm.
into Atlanta, to starve the city, and hopefully for the Union to put an end to General Sherman's 3 month long Atlanta campaign. We've talked about this. We've talked about this in the past. The Atlanta campaign of 64. Along the way, Mary, we talked about Kennesaw Mountain. You may remember that.
Mhm. Pickett's Mill,
Pickett's Mill, and a whole bunch of things. Most
Ezra
recently,
Church.
the aforementioned Battle of Peachtree Creek. Now, by the August of 1864, General William Tecumseh Sherman, his military division of the Mississippi, along with his three armies, was still a gigantic army. The Army of the Cumberland, commanded by
Mhm.
George Thomas, the Army of the Ohio, under John Schofield, and the Army of the Tennessee, who's commanded now by some guy from Maine. I can't remember his name.
General
Oh,
Oliver Otis
that's
Howard,
right,
who
Oliver Otis Howard.
he takes command of that after soon after the Battle of Peachtree Creek. You have the Battle of Atlanta, and unfortunately, General James Burbsy McPherson is killed at that battle. And for a couple days, General John Blackjack Logan is going to be in charge of the Army of the Tennessee. But Sherman decided to make the change to a West Point guy. He chose Howard for that role. Howard, a few days after taking command, will have his first victory at the Battle of Ezra Church. And this is ultimately what leads to General Joseph Hooker leaving the Western
Right.
Theater. He kind of has a
Yeah.
meltdown over it, and he's like, you know what? I'm not happy with this. I'm leaving.
Well, it created a lot of changes, and Howard's promotion led to those changes you just kind of hinted at. Because Joseph Hooker, he gave it the old quit. He took his ball and went home, as they
Yep.
say, when he was passed over, and his old 20th Corps is now be under the command of Henry Slocum. Now, though seeing its numbers reduced throughout the campaign, Sherman's army still counted about 90,000 guys,
Mhm.
but the numbers are dropping. We'll see. He'll lose an additional 10,000 men by September 1st. The Confederate Army of Tennessee is also seeing their numbers dropping. And by August 1st, 1864, they're going to be down to about 55,000. Now,
Yep.
like their northern opponents, they also saw changes in high command. Most notably, the overall commander, Joseph E. Johnston, was unceremoniously dumped by Jefferson Davis on July 17th of
Mhm.
1864. A questionable decision by Davis, to say the least. It was made arguably worse when Johnson was replaced by John Bell Hood, a general who, to say was not as popular with the ranks as
No,
Johnston, was an understatement to say, right?
no, he wasn't. And it was, we're going to see, like we saw at Peachtree Creek, John Bell Hood does not have a good day there. He does not have a good day at Ezra Church either. And you could say that Jonesboro is not going to be a great day for him either.
No, and we'll talk about this later on. And we've said this a million times, so we don't want to belabor the point. But to suffice it to say, Hood's over aggressive approach, in hindsight, was a disaster in the grand scheme of the Confederacy, who are really hoping to see Abraham Lincoln's 1864 presidential campaign fail. Now, the Army of Tennessee also saw changes at lower levels too. General Leonidas Polk was killed on July 17th. Division Commander William Shot Pouch Walker, Mary, he was
Mhm.
killed on July 22nd. And Stephen D. Lee took command of Hood's Corps when he took the big chair, when he took over the Army of Tennessee. Now, their job in the Confederacy is pretty damn simple:
Mhm.
stop Sherman's army from capturing Atlanta, that critical supply and manufacturing hub, as well as home to 22,000 loyal supporters. Back in Washington, Mary, Abraham Lincoln, you've heard of
Man with
him,
the hat.
the guy with the big tall hat. He was fearing his reelection bid was doomed, and he knew that capturing Atlanta was going to go a long way into winning that election of 1864. So when Hood takes over on July 17th, the wolf, as they say, is at the door, as Sherman had already crossed the Chattahoochee River, and Hood's army was in serious danger of seeing Atlanta surrounded and sieged by the Federals, right?
Mhm.
So you hinted at his failed offensive at Peachtree Creek, in the failure again at the Battle of Atlanta on July 22nd. Hood's army is going to drop in size and morale, as the likelihood of holding Atlanta seems about as likely as you ordering a water at the mine.
Which is
Which you
exactly
which
what
you
I got there
actually
the
did
other
the other
night.
night, by the way. As I say that, I take that back. I take that back. You actually did, and so that's kind of how things are kind of going at this point. And so when you see the overall big picture, you can see the pressure that was already on the Confederates.
Yeah. And so flash forward to August 23rd, you have Sherman realizing that the Macon and Western Railway was operable when a train was observed going into Atlanta. So he figures out these Confederates are still able to get supplies in and out of the city. And Sherman asks his commanders, so he's going to ask Thomas, Schofield, and Howard, would they be ready to carry out a plan? And Thomas
Mm-hmm.
replies that they will be ready to go in 2 days. So then you have August 25th. The Union wagons are ready for this
Mm-hmm.
plan that they're going to undertake. And this was going to be Sherman's grand swing to the right. This
Right.
is
But just
his.
look, just look at the big picture first, though. I mean, Sherman, we've seen this throughout the campaign. He wants no part of a frontal assault
No.
on Atlanta and Hood's army. So he's gonna begin to move the chess pieces on the chessboard. He's gonna move his positions west, north, and east of the city, and begin to destroy the railroad in this, and like you said, cut off the city from its supplies. Now, here's the thing, though, Mary. It was risky because any perceived inaction to take Atlanta is going to further damage Northern morale, and the
Mhm.
increase of Lincoln's the likelihood that he's going to lose in the election in 1864 to our friend George McClellan,
Yeah.
right? Now, you mentioned the railroad. There was one last operating railroad that supplied Atlanta. It was the Macon and Western Railroad, which ran south from Atlanta, 15 miles south of the town of East Point, Georgia, where the Atlanta and West Point Railroad split off while the main line continues south through the town of Jonesboro. Now, if he cuts the railroad line into Atlanta, the city has no choice. They have to surrender. They have to.
Yeah.
because their supply line is going to be completely cut off. And once those Atlanta DQ runs out of blizzards, forget it. The town's going to be in mayhem, right? But that's exactly what they want to do. To accomplish the goal, Sherman, who was in Decatur, Georgia, is going to move the majority of his army out of their positions and move them around Atlanta to the west and then focus on destroying the Macon and Western Railroad to the south. Now, he's going to leave the 20th Corps now under Henry Slocum to remain north of Atlanta to
Yeah.
basically protect the communication lines and guard a railroad bridge over the Chattahoochee River. So now we jump to August 25th, Mary,
Mm-hmm.
right? What's he going to do? He's going to order his army of the Tennessee under the aforementioned Otis Howard,
Yeah.
Mary, from Maine, to march south and strike the railroad line at the town of Jonesboro. And here's the thing, though, when you look at this, is it sounds very, very organized when you go through this, but then as you go forward, because what he wants to do is he's going to order, he's going to also he wants to destroy the railroad at Macon, and he's going to use his cavalry under George Stoneman,
Yeah.
who was in charge of the cavalry in Schofield's Army of the Ohio. Look, there's three armies we're dealing with here, right? Now, once in Macon, instead of destroying the railroad as ordered, Stoneman is going to YOLO it and decide to make a run at Andersonville
Yeah.
to rescue those Union prisoners. Now, listen, we've said before that one of the biggest black eyes in Sherman's career is he never liberated Andersonville. But when he tried it, Stoneman, it was a disaster because Stoneman's going to lose his whole division
Yeah.
and he's going to get captured by the war child, Mary Joseph Wheeler.
Yeah.
Despite the valiant stand of the great Thomas Butler and his 5th Indiana Cavalry and those Indiana Knights, they, along with George Stoneman and the rest of his cavalry, are going to get completely bagged. They're going to catch them all. Stoneman, as a matter of fact, will become the highest ranking Union prisoner of war.
Mm-hmm.
He'll get parole 3 months later and go on to fight in Virginia and North Carolina, destroying bridges and doing those Beetlejuice things we talk about, the
Yeah.
cavalry does with the infrastructure. But while this assault on the railroad was happening, Sherman is going to begin to bombard Atlanta.
Mm-hmm.
And that's going to fizzle out because guess why? They're going to run out of ammunition.
Yeah.
And so that's going to stop too. Now, I know what you're thinking, Mary. What is Hood doing all this time? What's going on? August 10th, he's going to order Joseph Wheeler to destroy the railroad tracks that Sherman was using as a supply line. This was the plan that Joseph E. Johnson wanted when we talk about Peachtree.
Yeah.
And then now Hood's going to take control of it. Wheeler and his 8 cavalry brigades, they're going to do some damage, but they're going to be stopped stone cold at the Second Battle of Dalton when reinforcements from Chattanooga under the command of Joseph Steedman are going to join troops that were already there under Bernard Laybolt. And they're going to chase Wheeler away. But here's the thing. Instead of destroying Sherman's supply lines and forcing him to leave the area, which is kind of what they were thinking, the tracks destroyed by Wheeler and Dalton were fixed in about 2 days, according to George Thomas.
Yeah.
Wheeler, at this point, decides, you know what? The hell with this. He's going to take off. He's going to take his talents to Tennessee, and he will no longer be a threat to Sherman's railroad supply lines at any point.
No. No. And it's very interesting when you're looking at like the wrecking of the railroad. Like Howard discusses it in his memoirs, specifically when they get to this one point, late August, it's August 27th, but this is where he's talking about it. And he said, like, there's 3 different groups that are doing this railway wrecking. Now, this is what is the Sherman necktie, but there's 3 different parts that have to happen with this. So he said, very soon the lively work of the railway breaking was undertaken. There's different parties in the destroying of this. One party was now standing in a line, seizing the rails and lifting them all up together, causing a long span to come up and broken apart. And then you have another party catching the ties, throwing them upon a log fire to ruin them. And upon the top of a heap, others piled the rails to be heated in the middle. And then you have another group, and these guys would run with a rail and push its hot part against a telegraph pole or tree and run it around the trunk in opposite directions. From there, they sometimes would be twisted even more. And Howard mentions that they would have to go through a rolling mill because it could be used again. But the other thing to consider is to get that rail tie off the telegraph pole or the tree, you have to cut the tree down or the telegraph pole, or you have to burn it down. It is like it's destroying so much infrastructure as they're doing this. And they could do like Howard said it will take a day and a half to destroy part of the West Point Railway. But when you think about it, that's not that long. That's all these
No.
guys are doing is just destroying railways. Now, what's really funny is some of these guys after the Civil War are going to be involved in the construction of the railway out west as well.
Well, that's the American way. We fight people, then we build them
Yeah.
back up again.
Yeah.
But going back to Wheeler really quick, and with his cavalry out of the picture now, Sherman's going to turn to Judson Kilpatrick, Mary, to
Mm-hmm.
break the Macon Railroad. So on August 19th, Kilpatrick's 4,500 men are going to easily drive 400 Rebs under the command of Lawrence S. Ross out of the town of Jonesboro in a pouring rainstorm. Kilpatrick will ultimately get driven back, though, and he'll fail to break the Macon Railroad line. So August 23rd, I know we're kind of jumping dates, but August 23rd, 1864, Sherman wakes up and he realizes, hey, the Macon Railroad's still operational and the
Mm-hmm.
choo-choos are still rolling into Atlanta. And he realizes that, you know something, I don't think the cavalry alone is going to be able to do this. I think I'm going to need to use the infantry now. And this is a big thing for Sherman to figure this
Mm-hmm.
out. So this is going back to what you said a little while ago. He's going to meet with those three army commanders,
Yeah.
Thomas, Schofield, and Howard. Sounds like a law firm. That's who he
Mm-hmm.
meets with, right?
It does actually.
Right. And to your point, he asks how long they're going to take, and he says it's about 2 days, blah, blah, blah. So a couple of days later, on August 25th, their respective infantry is loaded up with 2 weeks of rations into their wagons, and they're going to leave their positions around Atlanta. Now, General Thomas, he's going to order the 20th Corps, now under Henry Slocum, because Joe Hooker is gone, to extend along that Chattahoochee River and guard that railroad bridge, like I said,
Mm-hmm.
crossing it. And the fourth Corps and the 14th Corps are going to start to move south. Okay, Howard's three corps are also going to start to move south, right? So General Schofield, his 23rd Corps, they're going to stay in position near the town of East Point,
Yep.
while that Union cavalry mentioned is going to guard the north and the south points. So you can see how Sherman is kind of moving the pieces around now,
Yep.
right? But he's got to pull the trigger. Now, this large Union troop movement did not go unnoticed by the Confederacy and John Bell Hood while he's sitting in Atlanta. But for the most part, you know what Hood does while they're moving?
Nothing.
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 Eh.
Yep.
He sits back and he decides he's not going to. There were rumors that maybe Hood thought that Sherman was retreating because it was a local woman who reported Sherman's men were stealing food and they were starving. They had to
Yep.
leave. But obviously, it's inconceivable that Hood would think that Sherman was retreating. But he certainly had no idea Sherman was planning to target Jonesboro. And
No.
that's the thing.
He
Is
thought it
you'll
was going
see
to be Jonesboro or Rough and Ready. Like he had no idea. And there's a lot of arguments. When I was doing my research for this, there's a lot of arguments. Like you said, that like, one argument is that Hood believed that Sherman was about to retreat, which is that would be very delusional to even think that. Like, why would he suddenly retreat?
he didn't.
He's
I mean, the
like,
people who say that are the
yeah,
ones who really want to take shots at Hood, but
yeah,
there's no way he plotted. He
yeah.
was
I didn't
that,
believe that one either. But then
no.
but basically, I think it's that the one thing I found is that I don't think Hood really understands who he's dealing with in Sherman as a commander, that he can't quite figure him out. And that's one reason why he's had, basically you have the failure at Peachtree, at Battle of Atlanta, and at Ezra Church, that Hood can't quite grasp or wrap his mind around what exactly is Sherman going to do and how is he operating as a commander. I think that's one of the issues is that he just
Mm-hmm.
can't figure him out.
No. Now, you said before, rough and ready at Jonesboro. Logically, Jonesboro was the target. I mean, look at it logic. For Sherman, and if Hood didn't think he would attack it, he certainly didn't think he was going to get there as quickly as he did. And
No.
that's the whole thing. I mean, don't forget, it's easy to look back with your 160-year-old, 160-year 2020 hindsight. But again, in real time, this stuff's not easy. On the
Yeah.
28th of August, Thomas's fourth corps, David Stanley, and the 14th Corps, commanded by Jefferson C. Davis Mary, they got to the town of Red Oak, Georgia,
Mm-hmm.
while Howard's three corps went a little further west to the town of Fairburn,
Yeah.
which is near Atlanta, in the West Point Railroad. And this is just a little bit west of Atlanta here.
Yeah.
Schofield's army pulled out of East Point to get on Thomas's left flank. Now, the next day, on the 29th, saw all three of Sherman's armies tearing up railroad tracks. That was their day that day.
Mm-hmm.
That was the whole point of this anyway. It really
Yeah.
was. So by 7 o'clock in the morning on the 30th of August, Howard's Army of the Tennessee, along with Judson Kilpatrick's cavalry, begin to move south. They're going to start to go. He also had his 15th Corps under Black Jack Logan on his left, and the left wing of Thomas Ransom's 16th Corps on his right,
Yeah.
with Francis Preston Blair Jr.'s 17th Corps behind them. 20,000 men. This
Hmm.
is not a raiding party, Mary. This is a little stronger than a raiding
Yeah.
party, right? That's kind of what it is. Their orders were to go as far as Renfro Place. But when they arrived in the mid afternoon on the 30th, you know what they realized?
There's
There's no
not
water here.
there's not a water
There's no
supply.
water.
And this is where there's a really, really cool story with the Battle of Jonesboro. And this is kind of what gets Howard into the position he's in for the Battle of Jonesboro because, you know, Sherman had basically told him, well, I want you to get this far, but if you could get a little closer, you have my permission to go that far. So when Howard realizes that he needs to get to the Flint River, which it's between three, like Howard says it's 6 miles. Another source I read said it was 3 miles. Howard goes to Kilpatrick and says, have you an officer general who, with a small body of cavalry, can keep the enemy in motion and not allow them to create delay between Renfrew Place and the river? And Howard wants to get his men toward to a water supply as well. Kilpatrick says to Howard, I have just the man, sir, aka I know a guy. And of course Kilpatrick knows a guy, right? Like it's Judson Kilpatrick, so of course he has a guy. So this is where you have the story of a guy named Captain L.G. Estes. He's an assistant
Mm-hmm.
adjutant general of Kilpatrick's staff. He's from Old Town, Maine. He's born in 1843, so he's 21 years old at the time he's doing
You
this.
know where Old Town is? It's
Uh,
right next to Orono, where the University of Maine is, Mary.
okay.
Black Bears, hockey. Anyway,
Nice.
go ahead.
It's very north. So he is going to join the First Maine Volunteer Cavalry as a sergeant in October 1861, and then he's going to be commissioned as a first lieutenant in March of 1862. And he's promoted to captain in August of 1863 and appointed assistant adjutant general at that time. So um, Estes goes to Howard, and Howard says to him, I am directed by General Sherman to halt my army here for the night. There is no water here for my troops. The enemy is harassing me all the time, and I want to know if you can drive them across the Flint River. And Estes just replied that he could, and Howard said, try it. Just go do it. So Estes heads back to his command, and with the 96th Illinois Cavalry, he charges the barricade of the enemy. He rides over and through them before they had time to form again, and he pushes onto the Flint River at a gallop. And the Confederates were so surprised at this that they scattered in every direction. So within an hour of speaking to Howard about this, Estes has driven them across the river. Estes then asked Howard if he wanted him to take the bridge. And Howard at this point is kind of like, you think you can do it? And Estes responds he could, and Howard gives him the orders to do so. This time he gets the 92nd Illinois and the 10th Ohio are sent forward with him. They are armed with, Howard says in his memoirs that it's Spencer repeaters. The source I read says it was carbines. I think it's more likely the repeaters because that seems to be what was most common in the Western theater, especially when you have mounted infantry or cavalry. That's what they were using.
Hmm?
Um, but they kept such a constant fire of the enemy barricades on the opposite side of the river that Estes was able to, with two companies of the 10th Ohio Cavalry, to charge across the bridge on just the stringers. So the planking had already been removed by the Confederates. And by this time, he's driving the Confederates back. And then by this time, the bridge is burning in several places. And he's armed with a revolver and he just runs back across the bridge and his troops follow him back over there. And then Estes and his men replace the planking on the bridge. They repaired enough that Howard and his men are able to cross it. In doing so, only 4 men are killed and 2 are wounded. Um, and Estes is going to be rewarded, or he will earn years later the Medal of Honor for rushing across the burning bridge, and he's buried at Arlington National Cemetery. But this action by him, just in my opinion, like it's what gets Howard exactly where he needs to be. Howard is now within 1 mile of Jonesboro. His troops had enough water. Howard had not expected to get there without there being like a big battle and him being like at least 4 miles away from it.
Right.
Howard would say of this, all the circumstances regarding this action made it striking and impressive. The necessity of securing water for my army and a lodgment on the eastern bank, the burning bridge and the barricades of the enemy, the charge across the burning timbers, and the relief given by its success not only impressed me, but all those present at the time. The action was phenomenal, and the promptitude and gallantry of General Estes and his men under a very sharp fire were unsurpassed. And this is one of these, I was researching. I've never heard of Estes before. So
We'll
he's one of
talk about
these.
him later. Actually, he's going
Yeah,
to come back. He'll
yeah.
get
He
back into
comes.
the fold again.
Yeah, he comes back, but he's going to earn the Medal of Honor for what he does here. And this is why Howard, one of the reasons why Howard is able to get to where he is. And keep in mind, he's only 21 years old, Estes is, when he's doing this.
I mean, exactly. And the thing about it though is now he doesn't have to find a ford. He doesn't have to rebuild a
Nope.
bridge because of how fast Howard got there. He's able to capture before the Rebs even knew he was there.
Yep.
See, Howard's speed can be used for good too,
Exactly.
right? There's no question. This time it
Just all
helped
those
him out,
people that
right?
say Howard doesn't do anything after Gettysburg.
Oh
This is
God,
like,
let's start with this. But by dusk on the 30th, Logan's 15th Corps is going to cross that Flint River now, and they're going to dig in along a ridge about a half a mile west of Jonesboro. Now you're talking the 17th Corps and the 16th Corps. They fell behind, but Howard decided really not to try to attack Jonesboro at this point. Now, since Miss Cleo was not a part of Howard's staff, Mary, he could not possibly have known that at that moment there were maybe 2,000 Confederates guarding Jonesboro.
yeah,
And if he had attacked, he would have run right over them and taken the town right there.
yeah,
But again, if you don't know, you don't know. There's no way Howard could have possibly known. But when he found out later, he probably said some pretty harsh, words for him, probably dang it and golly gee,
yeah.
when he found out that he missed the
Think
opportunity.
think of
But
what
again,
Ned Flanders.
yeah, but he was that close. But again, without knowing, you don't know. Back in Atlanta on the 30th, Hood is going to message William Hardee
Hmm.
saying he didn't think Jonesboro was in any threat of attack at all, despite the fact that a 20,000 man army was bearing down on it. Again, he did not know. By 6 p.m., Hood realized that guess what? He was wrong. RONG wrong,
Yeah,
okay, about Jonesboro being safe when he got a message from the guy in charge, a guy named Joseph H. Lewis, who commanded a small brigade of Kentuckians, the 2nd, 4th, 5th, 6th, and Ninth, and from Hardee's Corps, and reported, hey, there's a gigantic army on my doorstep. Thought you might want to know that.
yeah.
Now, Hood then tells Lewis, I want you to hold Jonesboro at all hazards. And he starts scrambling, Hood is now, to find replacements, for reinforcements. A true pucker effect moment now for Hood, who must have been stunned when he heard this news. Again, he never thought the feds could get there so quick, and that was a big part of this.
Yep.
So what does Hood do? He immediately orders the rest of Hardee's Corps to Jonesboro, along with the Corps of Stephen D. Lee. He placed Hardee in overall command of both, and this is the thing too, is this would have been, they would have had to march to Jonesboro overnight in the 30th because Stephen D. Lee and the rest of Hardee's Corps are in Atlanta. He tells them, Hood does, to march at night, by the way, in the overnight down to Jonesboro, be ready to attack Howard first thing on the morning of the 31st. What? That's kind of what they're thinking. Now,
Yeah.
Hood, again, he's the ever aggressive commander. He drew up a very specific attack order for Hardee. Now, his plan was to attack Howard's left flank and drive him right back into the Flint River. Okay,
Hmm.
sounds good. If that attack failed, he had a contingency, okay? Stephen D. Lee's Corps was going to fall back between Jonesboro to Atlanta to the town of Rough and Ready, about 20 miles north of Jonesboro, and cover the rebel army's retreat back to Atlanta. The town of Rough and Ready, by the way, Mary, is now known as Mountain View, and
Yeah.
it's just east of the airport in Atlanta. If you know the airport, you know the area. That's where Rough
Yeah.
and Ready
That
is.
sucks. It's not called Rough and Ready anymore.
Oh God, that's the best thing. I'd love to be a
Rough and Ready cheerleader.
prom queen in Rough and Ready. Can you imagine how that would be? But again, this was Hood's last stand to hold Atlanta. So he sent all of his ammo south to support the attack, hoping he could beat Howard and drive Sherman out of Atlanta. Easier said than done. Now, that next morning is on August 31st. Howard got a message from Sherman ordering him to take the railroad at Jonesboro and to hold it. I mean, no surprise, that's exactly what he wanted. By then, Howard got the intel that
Mhm.
Hood was sending a large army south to face him and was preparing to attack him ASAP.
Well, he tells so after Sherman messages him and says, I want you to take possession and fortify some on the railway, and we must have that road, and it is worth us to have a heavy battle for it. Howard messages him back and says the Confederates are shoving troops down here with great rapidity. So it's like they're here, and like Howard said that nothing, even if I plan it, could have been done better. He's talking about what Kilpatrick's going to do. Kilpatrick basically, we'll talk about this, creates like a decoy for the Confederates when they initially begin the battle to kind of distract them a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, it was probably around this time when Howard realized he missed that opportunity the night
Yes.
before to take Jonesboro. I can only imagine because he found out around that time that it was only defended by that single brigade of Kentuckians.
Yeah.
But again, when morning broke on the 31st, Hardee quickly realized that there was no way his army was going to be ready to attack on Hood's schedule. Now, again, don't forget, most of his men and Stephen D. Lee's men,
Yeah.
they didn't arrive until Jonesboro until dawn, and they were not in position nor physically ready to attack. They just completed a 25-mile nighttime forced march from Atlanta.
Through
Many of
terrain
the
that was terrible.
right,
Patton Anderson talks about it. He says the terrain was terrible and some of the men didn't have shoes. And a lot of them had been in trenches for so long that there was like, it was kind of like lack of exercise. They weren't accustomed to going that distance. And all of a sudden they're like, okay, you have to march X number of miles. And he said, like, it was really tough for some of the men to do that overnight.
especially uphill both ways, like my mother used
Yeah.
to say,
Yeah.
no question. Now, many of Lee's corps were still miles away by morning, and Hardee didn't expect them until early afternoon. So right off the bat, there's no way physically this is gonna happen. Now, when Hardee saw he didn't have all of his men and those he did were completely exhausted, he saw that he had 3 Federal corps in his front and 2 more nearby. So he's going to message Hood and he's going to say, hey, boss, you might want to get down here. This is a little bit more than a skirmish.
Yeah.
We have the entire friggin' shoot match down here. I'll tell you what, this upcoming battle has the makings of a monster that's going to determine Atlanta. How about you get your hindquarters down here since you're the leader to help defend this? Hood's going to respond, paraphrasing, no thanks, I'm good in Atlanta. You just go ahead and just attack. So just imagine you are Hardee, okay, and you picture that face as his picture. He's a grumpy
Yeah.
fella, right?
Yeah.
Now he knows he has to attack an army much bigger than his that could determine the fate of not only Atlanta, but because the election coming up, his entire country and their independence, and your boss doesn't want to come down to help lead the army in the attack and tells you, quote, just attack? Excuse you? Can
Yeah.
you imagine?
I'd be like, and at this point, Hardy's probably thinking, if this fails, I wonder if he's got in his head yet, I'm probably going to get blamed for this.
Oh,
Because the
yeah,
blame game always happens.
I'm sure we'll talk about that later. Now, what is Howard doing? He's spending the morning of the 31st having his men dig entrenchments on the Flint River, probably guarding his right flank, by the way, just saying. That's probably what he's doing, right?
I mean, the one thing about this is like reading Howard's account of this, you can tell that Ghost of Chancellorsville is still following him because
Oh,
he's
sure
like,
was.
I'm making sure everything is entrenched. It's just like what he did at Ezra Church when Sherman was like, why are you being so cautious? Why are you constantly protecting that flank? And he's like, buddy, I've seen this before and it didn't work out for me. I know what I'm
Right.
looking at.
So Howard's going to place Logan's 15th Corps on his right with William Harrow's division on the right, William Hazen's on the left, and Peter Osterhaus is going to be in reserve. On Logan's right, he placed John M. Corsi's division from the 16th Corps and George Bryant's brigade. No one ever talks about George Bryant, by the
No,
way, but he's an important guy.
there's
But
a lot of
anyway,
guys at this battle I've
all
never
right.
heard of before.
So George Bryant, he's from the 17th Corps. He's going to be on Logan's left. Now, the rest of Ransom's brigade, his 16th Corps, is set up on a bank on the Flint River on Logan's right, while the remainder of Blair's 17th Corps sat on a west bank on Logan's left flank. So they're pretty well entrenched. He also had remnants of 3 other corps, all within shouting distance of the Flint River if necessary. Oh, by the way, Mary, Judson Kilpatrick, his cavalry brigade, is also placed south, guarding Anthony's Bridge on the
Mhm.
east bank of the Flint River, along with 4 artillery batteries on the west bank. The bottom line, Mary, your boy Howard, He set up pretty damn strong
Yep.
with 12,000 men in his line and 8,000 in reserve. They are ready to rock. At about 1:30 p.m. on the 31st of August, SD Lee's Corps finally arrives in Jonesboro.
Yep.
Again, they're expected in the morning. It's 1:30 in the afternoon. They come rolling in on a forced march through that terrain, tired as hell from Atlanta, and they are in no way ready to fight. If
No.
anybody needed a blizzard from DQ Moore, it was going to be SD Lee's men at this point. They were exhausted, they were tired, they were hungry, they couldn't do anything. So, despite the fact that William Hardee has 26,000 men on the field, he's got 20,000 to fight. Oh, and by the way, while they were marching from Atlanta to Jonesboro, thousands took off and, they left. They deserted along the way. So it's like a car losing parts, like planes, trains, automobiles
Yep.
rolling down the road.
That's
People,
literally
these
that
soldiers,
describes SD Lee's career in the
right?
Civil War so well.
And so you can just imagine you're in this situation, right? Nonetheless, orders are orders, and Hardee arranged his men to attack. He put his best commander, an Irishman, Mary, guess what his name was?
Claiborne.
Patrick Claiborne on
Mm-hmm.
his left and S.D. Lee on his right. Now, Claiborne arranged his men with Mark Lowry on his left, William Bate on the right, and Benjamin Cheatham in the rear, in the Savannah. That's where
Yep.
Cheatham's going to be, right? Lee is going to put Carter Stevenson's division on the right of Claiborne, followed by John C. Brown. George Maney's men, we'll talk a lot about him. They're going to be in the rear of both divisions. So they're doing their best they can. Hood's trying to plan attack with both corps offensively, and they want to do an echelon attack,
Mm-hmm.
just like here in Gettysburg, right?
Yep.
They're going to go left to right, though, meaning the brigade of Lowry under Claiborne is going to be the first to attack. They're going to attack on the left, and they're going to hit them, and they're going to move to the right. And then they're going to break through. Hilarity is going to ensue. They're going to Kool-Aid man to the line.
Yep.
Everyone's going to be happy. They're all going to go home and have sweet tea. That's the plan. Okay, that's how it's going to go.
That way, though.
It does not. So Claiborne's men are going to start to move north on the left to attack the 16th Corps under Ransom. That's the plan. Lee, S.D. Lee now, would then attack on the right against Blackjack Logan's 15th Corps, who run Ransom's left. So just imagine, I know it's confusing, but conceptually, just imagine how they're going to go. Claiborne's going to hit, and they're going to move over to the right, and they're going to continue along right down the line to S.D. Lee. And just before they started, just when it could not get worse for the morale of the Confederacy, here comes William Hardee riding on a friggin' horse.
Yep.
And he yells to his men, "Men, fix bayonets." And the men literally groaned. Are you
Because that was Hood's
me?
order. Hood was like, make sure they fix their bayonets.
Okay, they were not up for a fight anyway at that moment. They marched all night, uphill both ways, and now they're being the concept of hand-to-hand combat. That was not on their bingo cards when they woke up that morning. It wasn't. They were hoping for a nice little distant fight. Everybody wins. That's how it goes. It's about 3 o'clock in the afternoon now when Hardee finally kicks off what will be known as the Battle of Jonesboro, with a heavy artillery barrage on the Union position, while Claiborne is going to send his skirmishers forward soon after.
Yep.
Now here, Mary, is where the train goes off the tracks for Hardee.
Yeah.
Pretty.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say, and it did not take long. We're going to. I know what you're going to say, but for whatever reason, I have my suspicions. S.D. Lee jumped the gun on the right and sent his men in early. Now, again, this is supposed to be an echelon attack. In an echelon attack, timing is everything. And already, in 1 minute past the hour, it's already screwed up.
Yeah.
Now, the likelihood is the sound of the muskets from Claiborne's skirmishers probably thought, S.D. Lee thought that was the main attack, and that was his signal.
Yeah. And these are Granbury had sent skirmishers forward. And one guy, Samuel T. Foster, who was part of it, said that it was just like raining bullets down on them but as soon as they gave out, they were getting closer to them at every moment. And then all of a sudden the Union guys run. And this is kind of the diversion that they've created. But it's so loud that, as you said, like S.D. Lee is like, that sounds like the battle's just begun. And then he just goes. Yeah.
He Leroy Jenkins at Mary. He jumps in their thing and screws the whole thing up.
Yep.
So as Lee moves his men forward to attack William Hazen's division in Logan's 15th Corps, he's going to run into what? The teeth of Hazen, who slaughtered Lee's men. Those who survived the assault, they did so by taking to the ground and
Yep.
refusing to move forward in the face of this Hazen buzzsaw.
Yep.
The other divisions of Logan's Corps, primarily Osterhaus, began to fire on the Rebs and cut them up badly. It was bad. STD, Lee's men, they fell backward quickly. When Hardee saw this, he orders Lee to renew the attack. And you know what Lee says?
No.
He says, and the horse you rode in on.
Yeah.
Not there. Let me tell you something. First of all, my men are tired. They're hungry. They are in no position to fight again. There is no effing way I'm sending my men in here again.
He tells Hardee, he's like, my men cannot do this. A second assault is not going to take their position at all.
No, Hardee now faced the reality that this attack was screwed up from Jump Street in the first minute and was already doomed. And he was pissed off now that Hood would refuse to come down from Atlanta and was staying back. So already, Hardee's got his dander up, as they say, right?
Yeah.
Now, on the Confederate left, Lowry's men, they did go in and they marched northwest towards the Federal lines, and they were surprised by Kilpatrick's cavalry, who was dismounted and hiding behind a fence, armed with Spencer repeating rifles, to your point, right? Now, usually when it's cavalry versus infantry, it's heavily skewed in the favor of infantry. Usually that's basic. But in this case, Kilpatrick's dismounted cavalry caused Lowry's men to break and run.
Yeah.
There was just too much. Now, Lowry did reform and got reinforced by William Bath, and they did finally drive Kilpatrick back over that Anthony's Bridge, over the Flint River.
Yeah.
But they're going to ultimately get stopped by Giles A. Smith's division and Blair's 17th Corps. So it stops and starts. They're moving forward. They're getting pushed back.
Well, they thought maybe that the Union right was going to be in the air and not anchored.
Right.
And it was anchored.
Yeah.
To the river.
Now, Howard could not believe what he was seeing. I mean, this is the Charlie Brown of the football guy. And suddenly he's getting success. He says of this moment, like you said a second ago, nothing could have been done better if I'd planned it to head an entire Confederate division away from the battlefield.
Yeah.
So he's like, this is my moment. Now this, you kidding me? Now, John C. Brown, Confederate from Lee's Corps, to the right of Claiborne, they're going to attack the left flank of Corsi's division. And they also ran into a hailstorm of bullets. And again, many of his men, they hid in a ravine and they refused to go forward. They had just about had it. George Maney's division, they were behind Claiborne and Brown, right?
Yep.
They were basically by themselves. And so he halted. He messaged Claiborne for his orders. And as Lowry on the left, they saw the futility to try to break through the Federal right flank. They just thought it was a complete waste of time. Claiborne's men were beaten up while S.D. Lee's guys were completely demoralized. They were completely exhausted. Mm. So Hardee at this point, he sees the writing on the wall and he calls off the attack. He orders a full operation, GTFO.
Yeah.
Let's fall back. Let's withdraw. And the survivors of Lowry's division to march to the rebel right to support S.D. Lee in case of a counterattack. They said, today's not our day. Maybe we'll have better luck tomorrow. During this first day of the Battle of Jonesboro, Hardee is going to lose 2,220 of his men out of 23,000. Howard came into the day with 14,000. You know how many Howard lost?
200.
200. You could lose 200 walking to the mine.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable how many people how one-sided this was. This was an absolute massacre, mostly of S.D. Lee's men, who probably never should have been put in that position to start with.
No, they were too tired and all that. And, Howard I think he got criticized a little bit after this first day because he's got all these guys in reserves and he doesn't throw them in place. And he said that it made me wondered why I did not immediately push in my reserves, as more than half my command had not been used in the conflict. Ambition would have spurred me instantly to take the offensive, but prudence and I believe the good judgment let me hold on until Sherman and the Army of the Cumberland came. So he was like, this is why I'm not putting in my reserves.
Howard, he was taking a victory lap at this point. He
Yep.
messaged Sherman about 4 o'clock in the afternoon on the 31st, and he wrote, "The Rebs attacked, and we were handsomely, and they were handsomely repulsed." Howard probably just put a picture of himself instead of the word handsomely, by the way. It's probably what he did. They were a picture repulsed. And Sherman
Yes.
goes, they were handsomely repulsed. That's probably what he did, right? Now, the thing is, and you mentioned a second ago, Howard chose not to counterattack.
Yep.
But Sherman was thrilled anyway. He got the message around 5 o'clock in the
Yeah.
afternoon. You know what? It's all good.
Well, the thing is it was never ever to wreck Hood's army or Hardy's, whoever the guys are. The goal has always been in this campaign to get the city of Atlanta, and the goal of this with what Sherman was doing was to wreck that railway.
Right.
And Sherman did say if you need to have a battle to do so and take that position of Jonesboro, then do it. But the orders never said, get Hardy's army. So I think can kind of let Howard off for that. I mean, like, yes, had he put in his reserves and chased Hardy, would it have been wrecked? Yes, I think it would have been completely annihilated.
Who knows?
But
But
who knows? Like, right? But at that point, like Hardy and SD Lee are completely exhausted. Um, and one Union soldier said that the rebel army had lost a large measure of vim, which counts a good deal in soldiering as well. Another one said that the agonies of the wounded and the dying as they lay between that night were peculiarly horrible as well. But
yeah, but if you're Sherman, you think about it for a second. While this is all going on, he also gets more good news from John Schofield, who let him know, oh, by the way, guess what I did today? I finally cut the railroad from Macon to Atlanta. And Sherman, he probably was so excited, he probably lit something on fire. He
yep,
just could not believe how it was. So he's in a great mood. Sherman is, right. He's got Jonesboro under control.
yeah,
Now he's got the railroad line from Macon to Atlanta cut. So what's his next move now? He's going to send Schofield in that Fourth Corps to destroy railroad a mile north of Rough and Ready, while David Staley's Fourth Corps was sent to destroy more railroad south of Rough and Ready. So at this point, Sherman's men, they're destroying a railroad up and down the track faster than it takes you to destroy Labatt's cans, Mary. Everything is going perfectly for this. And it just finally things are going well. Once they are done, both Schofield and Stanley are going to be ordered to move towards Jonesboro, destroying a railroad track all along the way.
yeah,
That's what they're going to do. So it was around this time when John Bell Hood's text message on his phone goes off.
yeah.
He got a message letting him know that by the railroad into Atlanta is destroyed. And now he's like, well, I have to immediately start to think that Sherman is preparing now to attack the city from the south. Because
Yep.
that's what he's looking at the battle plan. So it's about 6 p.m. now on the 31st of August. Hood is going to message Hardee and say, listen, you got to send SD Lee back to Atlanta immediately. Immediately. This is 6 p.m. Do you know when SD Lee started to head back to Atlanta?
It was much after 6 p.m.
It was 1 a.m. the next
Yeah.
morning.
Yeah.
I mean,
He's not a quick fella. I mean, I get it. The troops are tired and stuff. This is also the time too when Hood is basically going to tell Hardee, you know what, we're about to lose this city, and guess whose fault it is? It's yours. He said the attack must have been rather feeble as the loss incurred was a small number in comparison to the forces engaged. And he will go on to say that Hardee's failure necessitated the evacuation of Atlanta. So right, like Hardee must have just been like, what? What?
Hood described the first day's battle of Atlanta of Jonesboro when he got it. He described it as a disgraceful effort by all involved. Now again, he wasn't there. He refused to go. So that's how it was. The reality is creeping into Hood's head now that Atlanta can no longer be held. He's going to begin to give initial orders to abandon the city.
Yeah.
Now, despite the Army of Tennessee battling Sherman from Chattanooga to Atlanta since May, Hood is now having that existential reality that this hunt might be over, this for real, which would be a mortal wound to the Confederacy, and any realistic hope of holding on to the election was basically completely over. Now, SD Lee, like I said, is going to leave Jonesboro for Atlanta around 1 o'clock in the morning on 9/1. And now Lowry is now put on Hardee's right flank. What does that mean? That means Hardee with STD Lee. It's so tough to say, by
You
the
keep
way.
calling him STD.
STD. SD Lee. He only has 12,000 men to defend a 2-mile battle line. That's a tough day for Mother right there, right?
Yeah.
Nonetheless, he places John C. Brown's division in position on his left, and John C. Carter, who was from nearby Waynesboro, Georgia, by the way, that's where he's going to be.
Mm-hmm.
Carter was new to command because guess what? He replaced Manny because Manny was fired by Hardee for not attacking the day before.
Yeah.
So Hardee said, "Pack up, get
Yep.
your shit, you're out of here." Right? That's how it was. Now Lowry's men were spread so thin over a single line that instead of shoulder to shoulder ranks, they were 5 feet apart from each other,
Yep.
spread. That's how thin they were. So from left to right, you had the brigades of Charles S. Olmsted, John Weir, Hiram Granberry, and Daniel Govan. That's who he had. Now, the Rebs are scrambling to try to mount a defense from this inevitable Union full banana assault that's
Yep.
coming, and they know it is. David Stanley's corps continued to destroy railroad just north of the city. By 10 o'clock in the morning on 9/1, Stanley had arrived at a place called Morrow Station, just 5 miles north of Jonesboro. Just 2 hours later, they're 2 miles away.
Mm-hmm.
That's how quickly they're going. This is lightning fast when you consider the fact that they are tearing up track along the way. They are moving like a machine, rolling right down. So Jefferson C. Davis, right, his 14th Corps, they're going to arrive in Jonesboro and they're going to be placed on Howard's left flank with orders from Sherman to wait for Stanley and Schofield to arrive from the north. So they're waiting now. When they arrived, we're all going to hit Hardee's right flank. Everybody in. Everyone meet at the quarterback. That's the game plan, right? Now, Hardee, he wasn't stupid, Mary. He wasn't born yesterday, right? He basically sniffed out Sherman's attack that he was likely going to get hit in his right flank. So he reinforced it with 2 brigades. Because of the limited men, he basically had to put the men in the position of a salient, right? Now, a salient, from Gettysburg, is a very vulnerable position with 1 brigade at the point and 1 going east and 1 going west in this scenario, creating a 90-degree angle. It's vulnerable because it creates 270 degrees of attack radius, right? That's what it was. Ask Dan Sickles about that. He'll tell you all about it, right? Nonetheless, Hardee is going to place Daniel Govan's brigade at the point of the salient and Joseph H. Lewis's Orphan Brigade on the west side of the railroad, who are going to build breastworks to prepare for this attack. 3 p.m. in the afternoon on September 1st, General George Thomas is going to order David Stanley's corps to march to Jonesboro at this point. Meanwhile, Howard orders Francis Preston Blair to march down the west bank of the Flint River toward the rebel left flank near Anthony's Bridge. So he's putting all the pieces in, all the chips they're moving in at this point. The second day of the Battle of Jonesboro is going to begin at 4 p.m. when Jefferson C. Davis's 14th Corps is going to begin that attack on Hardee's right flank from the north. Davis will attack with 3 divisions: William Carlin, James Morgan, and Absalom Beard. Now, among Carlin's division was an entire brigade of U.S. regulars under John R. Eady. You know where he was born? Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, Mary. Nice. That's where he was born, okay? Fun fact, John Eady was the superintendent of the Gettysburg public school system for years.
Wow.
And before becoming an attorney in 1840. He was the original Mark Blanchard. That's who he was, nice. Right? But now he's left Gettysburg and now he's fighting down there in Georgia. Morgan's division of Ohio, Illinois, and Indiana men, they're going to march through a swamp to the east, where they're going to set up next to a ravine and start to build rifle pits. Carlin's division was on Morgan's left, and they tried to advance, but they're stopped cold when they realized that the rebel right flank was not in the air as they expected.
No.
It was pretty well defended. So things aren't going all that well immediately, right? So what does Jeff C. Davis do? He orders Absalom Baird's division under a brigade of 1,140 men under George Estey to attack a rebel salient from the north.
Yep.
Now they're going to attack the salient now. Baird himself did not trust Esty Mary. He rode along with him to make sure they actually attacked.
Yep.
That's kind of how it was, right? Esty's brigade deployed in two battle lines behind Edie's regulars. Mentioned they're regulars. Edie positioned the 10th Kentucky and the 74th Indiana on the right, and the 38th and 14th Ohio on the left. So at 5 p.m., the assault on Hardee's salient is going to begin. So Esty charged the salient, who was defended by the 6th and 7th Arkansas. Those regiments on the left I mentioned, the 14th and 38th Ohio,
Yeah.
they ran right through the Arkansas men.
Yeah.
Like it was nothing. But those other regiments on the left, the 10th Kentucky and the 37th Indiana, they had themselves some troubles, Mary. There was problems.
Yeah.
They got stopped pretty cold.
It was that was Govin's men, right?
Right at the point was Govan, yeah. That's what they were attacking.
But then Govan ends up the Union troops managed to break the line, and Govan is one of the officers who's going to be captured here, along with 600 of his men.
Yeah, they're going to get him. They're going to get him a little bit later. Morgan's division I mentioned before. They're also going to attack with the 17th New York, who's assisting Esty's men at this point, and the full assault on Hardee's salient was underway. Now that 10th Kentucky and 74th Indiana, to your point, they're going to get around and behind Govan's men, right as Morgan's division is going to hit them from the west.
Yep.
Real tough spot for Govan. He says, "The hell with this," and you're right. He's going to surrender with 600 men, as well as 8 guns from Keyes, Arkansas battery and Sweats, Mississippi battery. They're going to lose 600 men and 8 guns all one time.
That's a lot. 8 guns,
that's
men,
quite,
including an officer, Govan.
Yeah. Now, this capture of Govan by Baird is going to earn Absalom Baird the Medal of Honor for this. That's how big of a deal he was. But wait, there's more. From the east, the 17th New York and Esty's brigade is going to run over Lewis's brigade and capture 200 more. So you can see the wheels coming off the wagon with this one. With seeing the disaster in front of his eyes, Hiram Granberry is going to move his men on the right flank to face north, while Claiborne is going to direct Alfred Vaughn's brigade of Tennesseans to stop the Union advance on the western side of the railroad. They're plug and play. They're playing whack-a-mole now, just trying to find a way to stop this Union advance. Jefferson C. Davis had this battle won at this point, and he could have done a lot more. But you know what he does? He says enough is enough. He calls off the dogs. He says we're done.
Yeah.
And so he pulls the attack off. Now, one general who was nowhere to be seen was the 4th Corps under David Stanley, who was last seen north of Jonesboro. Sherman himself was wondering where the hell Stanley was.
Perhaps Sherman had arrived at Jonesboro, and he witnesses some of this second day of the attack, and he said that they're rolling them up like a sheet of paper. Like that's how he remarked of the attack that they were doing.
But there was this mystery of what happened to Stanley. He vanished. Was it a Rosewoods clown attack? We don't know. But what happened was he was actually on the field, but was slowed by that difficult terrain east of the railroad while Davis was attacking. So he was supposed to attack with him, but he got stuck in the weeds and he didn't make it. His 2 division commanders, Nathan Kimball on his right and John Newton on his left, ended up capturing a rebel field hospital before running into the remnants of Carter's division, the one Maney commanded the day before. When Hardee saw this latest threat of the oncoming men by David Stanley's 4th Corps, he's going to ultimately end up moving Carter's division into position to defend the right flank now. So he hasn't given up yet. He's still trying. Now, darkness is starting to fall as Stanley ordered Kimball and Newton to build breastworks and dig in, while Hardee continued to defend his right flank, while those Union troops continued to build entrenchments along the Flint River on the east bank as well. So they're gearing up for more. Finally, Stanley decides to call it a night, and he's not going to pursue Hardee anymore, which pissed off Sherman at this point. You barely got here, and you didn't do anything, and now you're stopping. Because he had ordered his armies to surround Hardee. Because what he wanted to do was this. If Hardee chose to remain in Jonesboro, he was going to surround him. Or chase him if he chose to leave the dance floor. That's what he wanted to do. And also, for whatever reason, Sherman thought that S.D. Lee was still in Jonesboro. Even though he was long gone as of one
Yep.
o'clock in the morning, he still thought that SD Lee was there. So September 1st, we mentioned 1864, he saw the Macon and Western Railroad officially finally cut. It had been the previous day. In 2 days of battle, it were successful one for Sherman's army. And like you said a little while ago, if the goal was to cut off the railroad, it was achieved on 831.
Yep.
So when you look at the casualties on 9-1, it kind of makes them kind of feel like they were wasted lives if you think about
Yeah.
it.
Like what was the point of they had already got to that. Um, and it's 11 o'clock on September 1st, Hardy issues the withdrawal of their troops. And basically what all Hardy was doing that day was really giving Hood the time he needed to evacuate Atlanta on September the 1st. For the
Yeah,
most
just
part, they're
yeah.
they're out of there.
But looking at the numbers first, I mean, on the Union side, the 14th Corps alone lost 1,300
Yeah.
guys on 9-1. The Rebs lost 1,400, 900 of which are prisoners, throwing the additional 200 the next day. Now you mentioned before Hardy on September 1st quietly made the decision to evacuate Jonesboro and march to a place called Lovejoy Station, and he pulls this off right under Sherman's nose.
Yep.
It's kind of like he just basically gets them going. This battle was a complete disaster for Hardee, but he was able to sneak away 3 divisions out of Jonesboro in the face of 12 Union ones.
Yep.
So if you're looking for the silver lining society, at least you got that
Yeah. But
right.
this battle, Jonesboro, is what determines the fate of Atlanta. And whether the blame, like, yes, you can put the blame on Hardee, but also on Hood for not showing up. But I mean, you also have to give Howard credit for how he sets his men up, how he attacks, and how hard they fight. Like it is,
Yeah.
this is a good day for Howard here, and also to Estes for being able to get Howard into that position so close to Jonesboro, which Howard did not expect to get that close to Jonesboro, and he thought he was going to have to fight a lot harder to even get there
Mm-hmm.
as well.
Now on the Confederate side, your Hood, your supply lines are cut. Your pets' heads are falling off.
Yeah.
Everything's going wrong. You had no choice but to evacuate Atlanta, like we mentioned earlier, on the evening of 9-1. And as the results of the second day's Battle of Jonesboro came in, he instructed Alexander Stewart's Corps, the one that was left behind to defend the city,
Mm-hmm.
to basically warm up the engines and leave Atlanta. And they're going to leave down the McDonough Road. They're going to go. Stephen E. Lee's Corps would cover Stewart's retreat. So by 11 p.m. on 9-1, the Confederate rear guard under Samuel Gibbs French is going to leave Atlanta after burning 85 train cars filled with ammo that were left behind in the city that they did not want the Union to catch. This fire caused a gigantic fireworks display and a fire that destroyed several buildings in Atlanta, which to this day is still blamed on Sherman,
Yep.
right? It is what it is, but reality, folks,
Yep.
sorry to tell you, right? The next day on September 2nd, 1864, 160 years ago today, Mary, federal troops under Henry Slocum began to move into Atlanta, who were likely treated as well by the locals as if Tom Brady himself appeared in town today.
Yes. Not
Pretty
very well.
close, right? Now, Slocum immediately messages Washington and says what? He says,
Uh,
General Sherman has taken Atlanta.
yep.
He has. He gives the credit to Sherman. Of course he would, right?
And then
But
Sherman will say Atlanta is ours and fairly won.
he'll send that to Halleck later on. Now, the next morning on the 3rd, Sherman's going to get word from Slocum that he's sitting in Atlanta, probably at Montana's Pub and Grill right downtown. That's probably
Yep.
where he is. And he decides at this point, you know something? I'm not chasing Hardee anymore. We're going back to Atlanta. We're done.
Yep.
This is so he calls off the dogs. When he arrives on 9-4, Sherman issues Special Order number 64, which basically told his men, get some rest, enjoy Atlanta, have a great time.
Yeah.
That's what he
And
basically does.
they've been campaigning since May, on this long just journey from Chattanooga. Howard will say of, the time in Atlanta, he said, perhaps the interval of hard campaigning and continuous fighting was never more acceptable and enjoyable than during our sojourn in about Atlanta. Like supplies are coming into them. Howard mentions that all these mailbags came in, and finally the men can write home and let them know what
Mm-hmm.
has happened. And he said there was joy, great joy throughout the land. And of course, its influence found its way through the mail in every tent. So the morale of the army is, I mean, it's been it's been pretty good, but now it's like these guys get a break. On the Confederate side, however, people aren't too happy about it. Mary Chestnut wrote in her diary, "Since Atlanta fell, I felt as if all were dead within me forever."
Yeah, as much as they were celebrating the North, the South was mortified. And they knew they likely witnessed the final chance for independence, and they realized that they had suffered a legitimate mortal wound. Um, After the Battle of Jonesboro, Hardy had it with John Bell Hood. That was
Yep.
it. He immediately requested a transfer to command the Department of South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida. Some think he might have been fired, but I think the reality is Hardy said, I can't do this anymore with this guy. I'm done.
Yeah, I
That's
think it
pretty
was
much what
more
it
like
was.
I'm done. I've been blamed for this. I've tried to work with him. Um, and I think anyone in his position probably would be feeling that way as well, that it must just have been such a frustrating experience.
Yeah. With Atlanta captured, it changed everything for Lincoln in the North. Everything.
Yeah.
The Copperheads in the North, the Peace Democrats in the North, they now finally saw the light at the end of the tunnel, that they could support this president to fight through the end, to win the election, to end the war. They finally had something after a brutal 64 and a brutal 63. They finally had something to root for. Now, this war is going to continue for 6 months. And for all intents and purposes, the capture of Atlanta, thanks to the final battle in the final battle of Jonesboro, it really put a nail in the Confederate coffin at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And when you look at the primary big four battles at the Battle of Atlanta, Peachtree, Atlanta, Ezra, and this one in Jonesboro, it was a situation again, wrong guy, wrong time for the
Yeah.
Confederacy. It just was. You go 0 for 4 in October as a baseball team in the pennant race,
Yep.
you ain't gonna win. And
You're
that's
not
what
in the
happened.
World Series.
That's you don't win.
Yeah.
And I can only imagine the Joseph E. Johnsons of the world who are sitting back saying, if you just let me stay with it a little longer. Again, hindsight being my benefactor.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, what John Bell Hood proved, and this has nothing to do with later stuff with
Oh,
Franklin and Springer, he was a disaster at Atlanta, and he cost lives and he cost them the city because of how he chose to attack. He was not at Ezra. He stayed back.
yeah.
Him not being at Jonesboro was unconscionable, considering
Yeah.
that William Hardy begged him to come
Yeah.
and take
Said, I
command,
need your
and
help
he
here. Like,
and he said no. He should have been there anyway. But when your subordinate asks you for help and you sit back and say no, it says a lot about who you are, and that's who John Bell Hood was,
yeah.
unfortunately for them.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. And then on the Union side of it now, you have Sherman sitting in Atlanta wondering what the next steps are going to be. And in doing this, Howard mentions he corresponds quite a bit with Grant and Halleck during this time. He's going to consult freely again with his commanders of his army. He's going to consult with Howard. He's going to consult with Slocum. He's going to consult with Schofield and Thomas and all of them as to what the next steps are. And then, Howard talks about how Sherman starts to reorganize his forces with a view to efficiency. And then Howard said, but his main plan for subsequent operations was early formed in his own mind. Yet it took him some time to work out the details. The plan covered all that may now be condensed into one expression: the march from Atlanta to the sea. So that is what Sherman is going to be sitting and doing at Atlanta from September to November 15th. Once they leave for the march, is that he's trying to figure out logistically the next step, and that's going to be the march to the sea.
Yep. The Atlanta campaign is over, Mary. The Union has won. Um, Went through Joseph E. Johnson, finally to Hood, and Atlanta is won, and it was theirs. So that's the end of this one, Mary. So let's
Yep.
let's drop this off here. But I think when you look at Jonesboro and you visit it now, it's still there, a portion of it anyway.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the Confederate dead who died in this battle are now buried at the Patrick Claiborne Cemetery, which is
Yep.
named after him. You can go visit it today. It's right along the train tracks. You can still see a lot of the remnants of the battle. It's pretty pristine overall, although there is some urban development. So if you want to go visit Jonesboro, you still can. But again, it's a very underrated battle because it was the last call for alcohol for the Confederacy in Atlanta.
Yep.
Losing that, and then especially losing the Macon and Western Railroad, their supply line, they were done, and they had to retreat and they had to evacuate the city, leaving those 22,000 Confederate loyalists in the rain holding their diaper Marys, I like to
Yep.
say. And
Yep.
that's pretty much what they did,
Yep.
and pretty much sealed the deal for the election in
Mm-hmm.
'64 for Lincoln. So when
Yep.
you
Yep.
look at the fall of Atlanta, the fall of Atlanta happens because of the wins at Peachtree, the Battle
Mm-hmm.
of Atlanta, Ezra and Jonesboro in cutting the railroads, and that python got tighter and tighter and tighter on the Confederacy, and they paid the price for it. You pay the
They
price
did.
for aggressiveness, and that's what happened. So,
Yep.
what's happening for us next, Mary? What's coming on the pike for us?
So we are probably going to be doing an episode about the Shenandoah Valley campaign, which
Oh,
is also happening 160 years ago. And
mm-hmm.
then probably closer to we'll probably have another couple episodes in between now and this episode that probably around the time in November, we'll be doing an episode just kind of around the logistics and the planning of the March to the Sea, since that is a significant part of what happens in the War of 1864, 160 years ago. I know for Sherman and a lot of like Sherman, the March to Sea was just a change of operations, but it was such a different style of doing warfare, and all the logistics that had to go into planning that with all these men he had is, I think, something that's really important to be talked about.
Definitely. All right. So off we go. Any final words from you, Finchero?
Well, thank you for bringing it like you always do. Thank you for sticking by me these last 4 years with this podcast. And thank you to all of our listeners for these 4 years and 135 episodes, the Facebook Lives, the book clubs, the roundtables, all of that. Thank you so much for your support. We could not do it without any of you.
And we are just getting started. Final thing, Mary. Rest in peace, Johnny and Matt Gaudreau. BC Eagles forever, true legends. The story is unbelievably hard to take. But in any case, off we go. Have a great week, everybody. Have a great Labor Day. Off we go. We will see you all on the other side.
See y'all later.
Peace out.
Bye.